One of the things that got me into this field of research, apart from the visual aspect of the old world buildings, were the construction time frames that were given. A lot of them were not even given a start to finish time frame. But on the ones that we do get, you're looking at footage here from 1920s. We're told Smithsonian providing us the footage. Even a lot of these high rises, even in the 20s and 30s, were said to have been built in a year, 18 months, less than 2 years, which is very difficult to believe if you stack that up against modern day timelines for building. For instance, we have this Hidalgo County, Texas courthouse recently constructed. Broke ground in 2018. It looks like they completed it in 2023, so you're looking at a 5-year build time for that. And when we turn the clocks back, and in this video you're going to be seeing some structures that were said to have been built in the 1880s even, before power tools, it really becomes difficult to believe. You have a method of transportation of horse and buggy, you've got pulleys, you've got none of the advantages of the modern day, yet we're seeing, or we're being told, these construction times of sometimes years, sometimes 14 months, as you'll see. Very difficult to believe. So let me know what you think. Is it possible? Is it just attributable to they worked harder back in those days? Or is there something wrong with the timelines that we've been given for these? I appreciate you being here. If you're new, welcome to the channel. Let's get into it. We begin with the Betts building in Philadelphia, a Victorian skyscraper said to have been built in 1889 and 1890. I don't have the actual dates, but there's a 1 to 2 year timeline for that one. The Betts building would be on this side of the seam here. This is the Franklin Bank building over here, also said to have been built in 1888, 1889. So again, another short build time. And they demolished this thing in 1926, we are told. I just want you to get a scope, get a sense of the scope of the architecture here, the weight of the building materials themselves, and this is a great image of the feeble-looking horse and buggy stacked up against the stone edifice of the Betts building in Philadelphia. We do have a rendering as well of supposedly what it was going to look like, possibly what it did look like. You'll see this a few times in this video as well. Originally it having a tower, we are told. And miraculously, we are provided with a construction photo from 1890. You think the etchers were hard at work on this one? And here's that top portion. Not really making sense too. Let's take a look here. This is the top of that Franklin building. They're going a lot higher here than it looks to be over here. So definitely a suspicious construction photo. Not the first we've seen here. The Betts building, Philadelphia. This is the Butler County Courthouse in David City, Nebraska. Said to have been built in 1890 or 1889, depending on your source. It only gives us the 1 year, that's why I include it here. I couldn't find any resource telling me when the actual build date was, so we're going to assume it was all done in that 1 year, like so many buildings at this time. The very small town of David City, Nebraska, at the time would have had a population of about 2,000 people, and in our modern day still has a population of about 2,000 people. But they built this in under a year, we're to believe. Next up is the Calvert Building in Baltimore, said to have been built between 1900 and 1901. Interesting, you get a construction photo back there as well. Or a little background action. Nice looking building, still stands. You can see it's been modernized here at the top. Never looking quite as spectacular as they do in these old photos. A little bit confusing on this one too, because this building also pops up as the Calvert Building, and I can find very little information on this one, but I felt it worth including in this video. So much decoration. Now this one is said to have been built, this is the Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City, Canada. And it's said to have been built between May 1892 and opened on December 18th, 1893. I think that makes it about an 18-month timeline. Now they do say it was constructed in several phases. But I've been looking at this one for several years now, and I feel like the timeline has been altered, or they've provided more information on the construction since this research has really taken off, I suppose you could say. They'll say that this portion here was built separately from the outer portion in the 20s, I believe it was. But this is an absolutely spectacular structure, even to say that this was done in 18 months in Quebec, Canada. I don't know if you know anything about Quebec City, but it's a harsh winter climate in Quebec City, like much of Canada. So you have to almost write off a lot of the winter months on these timelines. Let's not forget that as we're moving forward in this video as well. Cities like Chicago, New York, production naturally slows down. These are the construction photos we're provided with for this expansion in the 20s. You can see a date here, February 27th it looks like, and a little bit of action going on here at the top. I'm not sure why you would wrap the cone, the top part of the cone, before the bottom part, but this is supposedly a construction photo. And we have a series of those provided. So full disclosure, I do like to include them. Here we're looking like we're jumping back a year and a half, 2 years. And even further back in that same year, 2021, this would be June 2021, or sorry, 1921. And this would be December. So these are quite elaborate construction photos, all taken really from that same angle. Again, you have to look into the early etchers of, and photo manipulation. There's quite a bit of work done on there. I put a few links. Latent Lexicon has done some good work I looked at recently. Mind Unveiled did some good stuff on that too. So we definitely can't work on the assumption that they weren't able to modify photographs. So I think here it is, the Chateau Frontenac here in the 40s. Looking spectacular, looking old, looking all like one building. This is the Wells Street Station in Chicago for the Chicago and Northwestern Railway. This one is said to have been built 1852, 1853, very, very early time period for our North American narrative. Also supposedly burned down in the Chicago fire and then rebuilt in 1881. I assume that this would be the rebuilt version. Not much difference really though, is there? Now some of these are taken out of my Demolished Buildings of North America books. This would be one of them. This one they closed down in 1911. Moving on to the Temperance Temple in Chicago. Now we are told they broke ground for this in 1890 and it opened in May of 1892. Now that building timeline coincides with the build timeline for the Chicago World's Fair, which is also interesting. It was demolished in 1926, so a very short shelf life on this thing. The Women's Temperance Temple. Now here we see a drawing again, very similar to what we saw earlier with the Betts building. The Temperance Temple supposedly meant to have one of these towers on it, but I suppose we're to believe it never got constructed, or maybe it was removed. Not sure, but interesting. So we're looking at a sketch of the clearinghouse in New York City. This one's strange, so the cornerstone was said to have been laid on October 2nd, 1895, and then only 3 months later they dedicated the building. January 15th, 1896, they dedicate the building. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. 3 months to build this, from cornerstone to completion. Complete fiction as far as I'm concerned. Maybe that's why half of what I can find on this are just sketches and illustrations. This is a spectacular looking structure. Here's a photograph, just to give you a sense of the beauty of this thing. This is incredible. Here we have a street scene. With some information. They always give you the dollars, don't they? Dollars down to the penny. We do have a little bit of the interior on this one too. And the interior on some of these structures are very rare to find, so this gives you a sense of what they were able to accomplish in that 3-month period between laying the cornerstone and dedicating the building. Take a look at the curved ceilings. I know it's not a great photograph, but you can still get a sense of what's going on in this room. And truly, truly, truly spectacular structure. Of course, had to be demolished. And it looks like that demolition took place in the 60s. Jumping across to the other side of the continent, we're looking at the Santa Ana Courthouse in California, said to have been built in 1900 to 1901. At a time when the population of Santa Ana would have been around 5,000 people. Now this thing still stands, believe it or not. It's fairly a popular wedding venue, it looks like. As I noticed when I was doing the research, you could see the high quality construction materials here going on in Santa Ana in 1900. And we do have some early depictions. And you get a sense here of the other buildings in the general area as well at this time, at this early time. And you want to know what it looks like in the modern day? Very typically what they like to do is take away the eye-catching portion of these structures. You can see that they've done away with all of this here, the bell tower, and even the front part of the facade here has been flattened and planed out. So that's what they do to these things over time. Now, is it just for safety purposes? Was it crumbling? It's only a 120-year-old building according to their narrative, so why would that be the case? Especially when you look at, again, the quality of construction here. What I suggest is that they are taking those triggers away from us. When you see something like this is a trigger in our mind to say, whoa, something's going on here. We don't build this way today. But when you take that away, it becomes much more plausible. Moving on to the Denver County Courthouse. So construction started on this one in 1881, we are told, and completed in 1883. At a time when the population of Denver was about 35,000 people. Of course, you'll tell me that they had deep pockets in Denver because of the silver and gold mining that was going on there. Seems to be a way to explain away all sorts of magnificent architecture. Here we have a street scene of that area from the time. Now they tore this thing down in the 30s. Why on earth you would tear such a structure down? Well, I think we're getting the picture. A lot of unreasonable things seem to have gone on. It really is a tragedy to to see all these structures that have been demolished. Again, this is one of those ones that I have included in my my books on demolished buildings here in North America. This is the old Museum of Art in Detroit. Said to have been built in 1888. A pretty spectacular looking castle-like structure you can see all even along this row. Detroit, really a spectacular city. Having been devastated by the powers that shouldn't be, as far as I'm concerned, taking away a lot of this old world majesty. This was demolished in the 60s to make way for an interstate highway, we are told. And there's a nice view of the quality of construction materials, having what they'll call that Richardsonian Romanesque styling. Very large blockwork going on here at the bottom. Not easy to build like this whatsoever. Very difficult to even conceive of how they put this together. The Detroit Art Museum. The old one. There's a new one as well. The Franklin County Courthouse in Columbus, Ohio. I did do a video on this one, Impossible Architecture. So they say they laid the cornerstone in July 1885, on July 4th, as you do. And it ends up being completed or dedicated by July 13th, 1887, just over 2 years to complete this structure. And you can see what they did to it, very similar to what we saw in the Santa Ana Courthouse. They decapitate it and they put these stupid flat roofs on there, and eventually they end up demolishing it in 1974. Of course, when it gets to this state, the outcry, I imagine, isn't as dramatic as if it would still look like this, as far as the resistance to tearing it down would go. Okay, getting to one of my favorites now, the Hotel Netherland, or Hotel New Netherland in New York. Built in 1892 and 1893, so within a 2-year time period again, by architect William H. Hume for a William Waldorf Astor. Spectacular structure, 17 stories, at the time the tallest hotel structure in the world. And maybe you can tell why it's one of my favorites. Really is something special, so much going on in that 2-year build time in the 1880s before the power tool. Truly spectacular. They end up tearing this thing down in 1927. Here's a colorized photograph. 1927, so not even 30 years we're getting out of this sucker. Or maybe just over 30 years if my math is correct. The Hotel Netherland. Originally the Hotel New Netherland. We do have some postcards of some of the interior as well. Again, to give you a sense of how majestic this thing was. So you really have to start scratching your head now on these build times. Were they really capable of banging this stuff off in such a short period of time? Or are we looking at some deception here with the timeline? You know what I think. My channel is dedicated to unraveling the mystery of the past and pointing out the flaws in the narratives that we were given. Look at the detail here. It's truly spectacular, and a real tragedy that anything like this would have been demolished. Here's a photograph of the postcard we just saw, and this actually gives you a much better sense of how spectacular this place really was. And another look at that amazing dining area. The Hotel Netherland, New York City. Moving on to the Metropolitan Building. I did do a video on this one as well. Gone Too Soon series, one of my early series. I did a couple of these demolished structures. And I include it in here because all we are told is that it was completed in 1890 in Minneapolis. look at this thing. It's truly remarkable. Again, you have the feeble horse and buggies looking up at the building that they were able to contribute to in its construction. So we'll be told. And like much of Minneapolis, it was torn down in the 60s. It's a truly remarkable building. A real tragedy that they ever took the wrecking ball to something like this. Even here you can see the very shiny columns on the exterior here. The stone circular or semicircular balcony on the corners. And a little bit of a look on the interior. You can see the elevator here and the open atrium area. All the wrought ironwork. Wonderful looking structure. Originally the Northwestern Guarantee Loan Building, but demolished again in the 60s. Moving on to the Pabst Building in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 14-story neo-Gothic high-rise building. Completed in 1891. Now we are told that Frederick Pabst purchases the property around 1890. And it's completed in 1891, so I don't know how much time that gives us for construction, but it's not a whole hell of a lot. Remarkable structure, included in my books, of course. These things need to be documented, and we need to retain the memory that these things did once stand. And it was demolished in 1981. Now check out my Milwaukee video for more information on that. I have a little segment on more of the visuals and what they ended up doing to that structure before they tore it down. Here you can see them gathered on the landing dock for the airships. Very possible. Very possible. A few more for you before we call this a wrap. I wanted to show you the Portland High School, Portland, Oregon High School. And we are told this was completed in 1885, at a time when Portland would have had about 35,000 people, roughly. Demolished in 1929 because they moved the school. Right, as if there was no outcry to keep this building standing. This looks like something out of Hogwarts. There it is, standing at that early time period in Portland, Oregon. The Hotel Manhattan. And we can see construction begins on this in 1895, and it's completed in 1896, miraculously, of course. 14 stories above street level, implying there's more below street level, of course. Demolished in 1961. And of course there's more below street level. You can see that the entrance on the corner requires you to step down from the street. Very interesting. The Hotel Manhattan. Here we have the old Hippodrome in New York. This one said to have begun construction June 1904 and opened its doors in April of 1905. So about a 10-month time period to have this sucker completed. And we're going to get a little closer here just to give you a sense of the building materials on the exterior, in case you thought it was made of cake frosting. Not quite cake frosting, is it? Spectacular looking structure. They must have really motored to get this thing done in 10 months. Probably thoroughly neglected the interior. What do you think? Of course they didn't. Here's the interior. Apparently it had a large tank, a fish tank that could rise up from the stage. I don't know who engineered that. Ridiculous. The J.H. Morgan and Frederick Thompson are the architects. So many of the architects have such spectacular buildings attributed to their names, but I don't think that they had anything to do with the construction. The Fuller Company was the general contractor. Hats off here. Hats off to the Fuller Company for building this in 10 months. They did a spectacular job. the Hippodrome. Give me a break. And our final building for this video, we come to the New York World Building. Now this thing constructed, we have October 10th, 1889, and completion date December 10th, 1890. What does that make it? 14-month time period on this thing? Demolished in 1955. And there we see it not long before the wrecking ball takes it, I would suspect. Part of the newspaper row, the iconic scene from early New York. Beautiful looking structure. All of these smacks of old world, all of this. And let's see if we can get a little closer and a little crisper photograph. You see the hustle and bustle, and you see what they were able to accomplish in 14 months in the 1890s. New York City. They even went to the trouble, even though it was 14 months, to put these figures on here. Come on now. You think there's a problem with the timelines, folks? I do believe I've illustrated that what we have been told is very implausible. Here's a demolition. Piece by piece. Taking it apart. And we do have some drawings of the interior. Not much, which is kind of silly too, you think. They would document this stuff before they tear it down. But of course not. They're trying to erase it, in my opinion. And another drawing of some of the interior of the structure. So this has been a look at some of the buildings that had very short build times, many of them no longer standing. It really has to make you ask the question, how is that possible? Thanks for watching.